Hi guys, another beautiful summer day here in Lithuania, although it is threatening to rain or might even do a thunderstorm later on this afternoon, but nice for now. Just out here in the forest for my normal Sunday morning walk, and it is late July approaching early August, and each year as I get older I get a little more nostalgic about things that I remember from my past, and one of those things is back to school. Every year about this time of year we started to go through the progress of getting ready to go back to school. So this chat might be interesting for you know, if you're an American about my age, or if you remember the late 70s. But even if you're not an American, or if you don't remember the 70s at all, stay tuned. Some of it might be interesting to you. These memories about going back to school aren't necessarily that good of memories, because I never really wanted to go back to school. In fact, I never wanted summer to end, or at least summer vacation. But mostly it's just kind of, now that I look back on how it was and what we went through, it just seems so bizarre, this ritual we went through in the late 70s. But for those of you that don't remember or don't know, I am from very rural, far northern Wisconsin. There's really not much there. But where I'm going with this is, in preparation for going back to school, we had to get a few new clothes to go back. And before I go any further, I know some of you might be saying, well, new clothes? We never had new clothes. We always had hand-me-downs. And I get that, but I'm the oldest and I'm the only boy, so not sure where I would have gotten hand-me-downs, although I do remember wearing used clothes plenty of times. Not sure where they came from, but anyhow, we would have to get some new clothes for going back to school. And in those days, at least where I grew up, we did have near a small town a store called Sears, and we also of course had something called Montgomery Ward. I believe we had a J.C. Penney as well, but these weren't really stores in the sense that you could walk in and buy things. They really didn't keep an inventory. What you did is twice a year, I think, they would send out a big thick catalog. There was essentially the summer catalog and then the Christmas or winter catalog. But from that catalog you would order your school clothes or whatever else you think you might need, and then you had to wait for it to be delivered to this small little shop in the local town, which was called Ladysmith, by the way, and in the hopes that they actually fit or you got the right size or right color. But that was it, and that was the process. I remember going in the back room and trying on clothes at the Montgomery Ward just to make sure they fit. If they didn't fit, you sent them back and waited for a different size. It took weeks and weeks and weeks. So that just blows my mind nowadays that we went through all that. But we would get, essentially, I think if I recall correctly, 2 pairs of pants or jeans, whatever you want to call them, and I think 5 shirts. And the pants, this will take you down memory lane if you're old enough to remember. You know, we didn't wear Levi's or anything in those days. I think really what we wore was something called Toughskins. They were a brand of jeans made specially for young boys who always seemed to wear out the knees in pants. And it wasn't denim. I don't know what kind of material it was, but it wasn't comfortable. But there was an extra layer of some kind of metal-based patch in the knees to prevent the knees from wearing out. But and if I remember correctly, the other brand that was popular or quite often bought was something called Husky. I don't know if that was the brand or maybe Wrangler made Husky, but the point is, you know, we didn't have any of these Levi's or Jordache or some of these name brand or fancy brands. It was either Toughskins or Huskies. So that would kind of take care of the pants and the shirts that you needed for the upcoming school year. But of course you still needed other items, and that's where it got really fun for me, is each year we would travel down to Iowa to visit some relatives. And while we were in Iowa, we always would go to Kmart. And I realize that there's still a few Kmarts around, but I'm not sure how many are out there. I haven't seen one in a long time. But anyhow, we would go to a Kmart in a town called Clinton, Iowa. And this was magic to me. I mean, coming from where I come from, this was a big deal. It was just a big store selling, you know, low quality stuff, pretty much the same as they would do today. But they used to have something called a blue light special. And it was basically, they would wheel out this cart that had a flashing blue light on it. And there would be some product or something on sale for whatever, 15, 20 minutes or until they ran out. And people would run to the blue light special. Kind of cheesy and corny. But the other thing I remember, which blew my mind, is they had a small cafeteria in the Kmart store. A little place where you could get food, you could get, you know, simple menu items. But they also had something called, I think it was called an icy freeze. I don't think it was called a Slurpee or a slushie. I think it was called an icy freeze. And it was just like shaved ice with, you know, sweet, very sweet corn syrup, and it was dyed a certain color. I think there was 2 flavors, cherry and blueberry. But that was a big deal to me, to be able to have that and walk around the store. But back to, you know, earlier I'd said, you know, well, we had the pants and the shirts taken care of, but we would get usually shoes and maybe like a big pack of tube socks at Kmart, probably some underwear. But the shoes, again, in those days, you know, I was still at the age where, you know, you didn't really dress to be cool. All the kids were pretty much the same. There was no being cool about it. That came later, you know, once you got to junior high school. But in these days, for shoes, you just got whatever was on sale or what your parents got for you. But I remember specifically, I think there was 2 kinds at Kmart. There was one called Tracks. They were just a sports shoe. And I remember having a pair of Pumas, or Pumas, however you pronounce it. And in those days, I mean, Puma, I don't think was a very cool brand. Since then, they've become popular, at least in Europe. But that took care of your school supplies, or at least your clothes. There was other things we had to get. If any of you remember, I think they called it a pencil box. Really, it was just a old cardboard cigar box that you stored all your school supplies in. Pencils, erasers, those little scissors that have the rounded ends on them, if you guys remember all that. But then once we had all that, you know, we had to come back from Iowa back to northern Wisconsin. But here's the catch. You weren't allowed to wear your new clothes until school, which, you know, usually was several weeks later or towards the end of August. But there was one exception to that, and that was the Rusk County Fair. And it was just that. It was a fair. They had livestock shows and entertainment and rides. And they also had a smash-up derby where the cars would smash into each other, which was hugely popular. But that was the one occasion where we were allowed to wear our new school clothes before school. After that, you kind of had to make those clothes last the whole year if you didn't outgrow them. So if any of you remember, we had at least what we called in our family school clothes and play clothes. You got home from school, you had to get out of those school clothes and put on some older play clothes, so you didn't get your school stuff dirty. You know, of course, things have changed a lot since those days. And in fact, they changed already by, let's say, the early 80s. By the way, the years that I'm talking about that I remember specifically are like from 1977 to maybe 1979. By the early 80s, a lot of this had changed. You know, you didn't order from a catalog. You actually, you know, for example, traveled down to Eau Claire, Wisconsin and walked into a store and bought your school clothes and all your school items. So it was kind of a few weird years where we did this whole catalog thing, and then we would go down to the big Kmart. And then, of course, you know, I got into middle school and high school, and then it was, you know, you had to have the cool stuff. And by those days you didn't just get clothes for school or at Christmas time. Nowadays, if you need a shirt or some socks, you just go get it. Doesn't matter what time of year it is. But sorry about that, I went a little long on that. But again, hopefully some of you do remember some of that, and for those of you that don't, that's how it was in the late 70s, at least for me, growing up in northern Wisconsin, trying to get ready for back to school. Hi guys, we live at the end of a gravel road, which is a dead-end road, so we don't get a whole lot of visitors here, and we spend an awful lot of time trying to make the yard and garden look as good as possible. So here on my YouTube channel, it's the only place where I can show it off. We're not going to win any awards or get on the front page of any magazines, but definitely looking better than it used to. It wasn't that many years ago. This was all jungle before we bought this place, so we put a lot of work into it.